people come into our comment section and like, who are these, I guess in their opinion, good-looking, like Chad-like guys talking about Xenogears? This is like throwing my world like out of whack. I don't believe, I never thought that guys like this would talk about this.
How dare they denigrate us Chads? We are we are a noble race.
I hate doing housekeeping. It's really annoying when you like find a new podcast and they give you like a hook at the beginning like we're doing, and then they go into like 15 minutes of like non-related housekeeping stuff.
Because we never do that.
I know, we've done it in the past.
Sometimes
I promise you we're not going to do that today. It's going to be very quick. Most people, because we announced it last week, we're expecting we were getting started with Planescape Torment this week.
They might have been expecting that.
That's not happening because I'm going to be out of town for work for the next 3 weeks. Yeah. So because of that, the series has been delayed a month. So we're going to be starting, we'll record it on March 28th, but the following week it'll be released. Yeah. So that's just really quickly. Sorry, everybody. Really, really want to make sure we're prepared and we do that game justice and do it the right way and not have any breaks in between. So it's going to have to be pushed back. This was a very last minute thing that came up at work. And so, it just like literally yesterday or the day before this was like got planned. So anyway, we're going to have a couple other episodes in between, kind of like we've been doing, which I think is fine because people have been enjoying those. And we've been getting a lot of good feedback on that. So today, Kaysen doesn't know what we're talking about.
No, I have not heard.
So I've got a notepad because I want to keep track of this. So hit me up with your top 10 PS1 waifus.
Oh, waifus. Ugh, waifus. Okay, PS1's going to be rough for me, actually.
I was not expecting you to take that seriously at all. I was expecting you to laugh that off and then me go, I'm just joking. We're not talking about freaking PS1 waifus. And you were like about to get into it for real.
Well,
now I'm
thought
curious.
About it before.
Now I need to freaking know.
Well, PS1's a rough one for me. PS1's rough. But I do remember my high school days of playing the N64 and whatnot.
Yes.
And like as far as that list goes, it's mostly Harvest Moon 64 characters.
Yes, I mean, yeah, right. Like there's whether 4 or 5 girls.
4 or 5 wifeable females, and they're all just wonderful seeming people.
But in your playthroughs, have you ever done other than
Karen was the first one?
Yeah,
because until I realized that she sucks and doesn't care about me.
She
at
doesn't
all.
do anything.
And then Ellie every time after that was always Ellie.
I always do Ellie.
Yeah.
She's the best.
She does.
She's
she
the best
feeds your chickens. She collects the eggs. She's like really helpful. Whereas Karen is just self-conceited and quite. She loves that alcohol quite a bit.
Easily, Ellie's the best.
Easily,
that would make a top 10 for sure.
Yeah. Whereas Anne will like brush your horses and brush your cows and like help you out there, but Ellie, much better.
Okay. So where does that fall on the list of top 10?
Well, this is N64, but gosh.
I know. Well, it's the same era, and that game kind of was on the PlayStation.
But I'll bet
it's actually
different.
A very different game with very different scenarios, and actually the characters' names are different, although they have the same sprites. And it's actually way more different than I thought it was.
Really?
Yeah.
We should play it, man. We should really play it.
And the music is a huge part of what I love about the 64 version.
And it's different?
And the music's totally different in this version. Huh. So it's not the same game.
Interesting.
Basically. But what is so is it Ellie or Karen that we're picking? Or the both?
I mean, Ellie, like we're talking waifu, right? We're not talking like,
yes.
Like...
Not like a summer fling. We're talking about...
Yeah. We're talking like stable
wife
life,
material.
Forever kind of stuff. Like,
yes.
Yeah, Ellie, for sure.
Okay, so what is she, number 6? Like, where does she fall?
I've never had to think about this except in dating games that have dating sim aspects to them.
Yes.
So all of the characters that I could ever think of would just be dating sim like versions of characters.
Does Nancy Drew have anything like that?
No, and I've never considered her. Nancy Drew, sometimes there will be a boy or two that she likes. but it's usually pretty different.
Okay.
And Bess is an idiot all the time.
So yeah, I was definitely not expecting you to like really start thinking about that. I thought you'd laugh and be like, "That's really it." And I'm like, "No, I'm just joking." So we'll get to the real topic. But I do think it will eventually sort of tie into kind of what I wanted to talk about, which is stigmas that surround gaming.
Yeah.
And I wanted to approach this from sort of like a two-pronged position. Like, one, the experiences I've had being stigmatized,
Yeah.
but also some of the stigmatizing I've done
Oh, sure.
to sort of like turn the tables and you know, this is as much a discussion for me to try to like be better at this as much as it is, you know, condemning anyone else who might have done it to me in the past. So the whole waifu culture is what I'm going to be sort of attempting to do on the back end of of my own stigmatizing of others. Right.
Okay.
Anyway, that went very differently than I expected, which is fine.
I could probably put together a list for you, but it will be the first such list I've made since I was probably 15.
Let's see where I want to launch off on this. Every time that I accidentally, and I really do mean accidentally, bring up among people that I have a podcast, I like immediately regret it.
Yeah, me too, because they start asking, what's it about?
Oh,
and I say,
what's it about?
Video games. And it's like,
really?
Okay. Either they play games or not. But if they don't play games, it's like, oh, cool. Conversation's kind of over. Yeah. If they do play games, it's like, oh, like Call of Duty? Are you like PewDiePie?
Yeah.
I'm like, no.
Yes. Yes. I the last time that I accidentally did this was when the guy trying to sell me pest control came over and like freaking insisted his way inside and was talking to me about other things. And so like, obviously I didn't buy from him, but we had a conversation that eventually turned to gaming because I mentioned I have a podcast. And all this equipment and stuff. And he was like, oh, what's it about? And I was like, gaming. And it like immediately, you could just see on his face, confusion.
How do you do a podcast about
you're
games?
36 or 7 years old. Do you have a gaming podcast? Like what?
Yeah, it's fun.
And this dude is younger than me. Yeah, for sure. Probably mid to late 20s. And I was baffled that a person that young even had this sort of immediate sort of stigmatization about it. So I tried my best to explain what it's really about. No, this is more of a literary analysis, which just like got worse. It just got worse somehow.
That's even worse almost. Yeah. It's like, oh, right. Yeah. The deep, the deep literature of Call of Duty. Yeah.
So anyway, at work, work functions and things like that, not only has that come up in the past, well, you have a podcast. What's your podcast about? Especially since we're getting ready to launch a podcast at work.
Oh,
and so a lot of people are asking me questions.
You do podcasts,
and
right?
Yeah, how do you do this? What's the strategy behind it? A lot of things I don't even think about at all, so I have nothing to add.
Right. Yeah.
But so like I have to explain this to people, and then they want me to show it to them. I'm like, no. Send me a link to your podcast. I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. And then just like the weekend goes by and I never do it.
We're the worst self-promoters in the world. There's one guy at work who grew up playing the same PS1 games that we talk about all the time.
Yeah.
In fact, I mentioned, because the same thing happened, right? Because it was like, oh, I do a podcast. Oh, yeah, what games do you talk about? I'm just like, okay, well, we do different games each time. Oh, what's the current one? Tactics Ogre?
That's actually, yes, that was the hardest one.
Yes. And
to be like, what are you playing right now?
But
this is not going to make any sense when I say these words. These two words being used together, it's going to like your brain will not compute it.
Or Xenogears or any of that stuff. He had played that game. He was like, oh, dude, I totally played that game.
Oh, nice.
I was like, really? Wow.
Nice.
And he's like, yeah, I like Tactics better. And I'm like, dude, we can have a real conversation now.
Nice.
He's kind of the only person who
It's
I've
like
talked to about it where it's gone well.
When that happens, if it does, it's like a 1 in a million or feels that way kind of scenario. Like, how is it possible or it feels like so isolated and niche that it feels extremely rare to come across somebody who actually knows what you're talking about when you mention a game like that.
You know, actually, the other video guys at work will sometimes watch my podcast, but they never played my games. They didn't play these games at all.
Oh yeah, they played different stuff.
Other stuff, but they'll
up or
still
whatever.
catch up on every now and then, you know?
Yeah.
Like we played Spec Ops The Line.
That's true.
And one of the guys, one of the video guys
about
at
that.
my job was like, "Oh, I love that game." And I'm like, "Yeah, this is a little different, you know?"
Yeah. And hopefully as the years go on, we'll diversify enough to where, you know,
it's not so weird.
It won't be so niche to be able to talk about it. But in general, I still think it's going to be hard.
Oh, for sure.
Because, again, I was at another like work function. I think this was like right when I started a couple of years ago. And no one was asking me about I was just listening into this conversation about video games.
Okay.
And they're all parents who are really concerned
about Minecraft,
about
and Fortnite.
the amount of time they're playing and things like this. And one of the guys there who I can't imagine is older than me. I mean, might even be younger.
Right.
Was like, yeah, we don't allow our kids to play video games. We don't have video games in the house at all. And there's this, and all the people started gathering around talking about this, like talking about how concerning and the addiction and like all these other things, and worried about, you know, the violence and like all this other stuff.
And especially like the communications with other people, like random people.
Yes.
On the headsets.
Oh, that's actually a really huge problem too. I mean,
oh, for sure. Playing Call of Duty, man, that was like, oh my gosh.
And
Turn
not even
mute everyone all the time.
Not even just, well, in the line of work that I do, which is, you know, human trafficking and things like that.
Right. But by the way, to clarify, Mike does not do human trafficking.
I was thinking that might have come off, sounded really bad.
It's a very interesting line of work.
I work in anti-human trafficking.
There you go. There you go. Much better. Much better.
Fetch me. Anyway, I work for an organization that's an anti-human trafficking organization.
You know, it'd be hilarious. There's somebody who works in human trafficking who's embarrassed to admit that they do have a podcast about video games. But will freely admit what they do for their work. Sorry. Let us continue.
Oh, my gosh. So anyway, it really is an issue, especially since like 2020 with the pandemic and everything.
Yeah, that's true.
When people were kind of at home, that a lot of these guys started using Minecraft and Roblox and these video games where they would talk to kids and like get them to jump over, get them to jump over to another platform where then they could hide what they're really doing, and the grooming could continue from there. Yeah. So I say all of this with a pretty like sound knowledge of the actual dangers of video games, right? Yeah. But my point is that they were talking about all of this, and I'm sitting there as somebody who has had this many incredible life-changing sort of experiences with games, the same that you would with any art form, right? So I didn't even contribute to the conversation. I didn't even bother, but it was weird, and it sort of like reminded me how niche a lot of the things I engage with actually are, and the way that most people view it from the outside, and how little they really understand about it, and how exaggerated, I guess, some of these dangers, or I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not exaggerated, the dangers are real, but what's exaggerated is the fact that that's all it is. This is the effect that video games have on people, beginning and end of conversation,
right?
And there's this
ban them, and
this whole thing, this whole just breadth of experiences, of stories, of really, really good connections you can make with people that is just not even considered at all.
Right, yeah.
So, you know, which is why it's so weird that I then get all like sheepish about it when people ask me.
Right.
Because what we do here is to try to bring that part of it to light.
Yes, exactly.
We're trying to show that there's a lot more to these games than what the generation before us, our parents, gave it credit for.
Yeah.
And we grew up. I mean, I grew up being heavily restricted on games.
Right. Yeah.
And the crazy thing is that attitude in my mother still exists, despite the fact that she knows that I do this. And I have talked about it before.
Yeah.
Like, I remember I was over there, it was maybe sometime last year, and somehow the topic of games and violence came up in a conversation, and I was talking about how the studies they don't show that there's a correlation between engaging in violence in video games and then that sort of creating more aggressive kids or enacting that violence in real life.
Gotcha.
And she just refused to believe me. Like, she just would not take that. She was like, no, that can't be right. No, that's the, I'm like, I can freaking like get online and show you the the meta analysis and like all this stuff. Like, I'm not just making this up. Like, she still had that opinion, even though I grew up to be a perfectly well-adjusted human being. Maybe she took some credit for that, for the fact that she restricted it so much. But like, when I got old enough, then she couldn't do that anymore. And she knows, how big a part of my life it is. And the fact that, I've made it, at least in part of like I guess you would call it a side gig, or like part, but I consider it being part of a career, right?
Sure,
like I do this for a living, at least in part.
Yeah.
And well, we've talked about even like Hideo Kojima in the past, who would lie about what he does for a living to people.
That's right.
Because he was afraid that people would, look at it, like look down on him for it. He would pretend he's in like he was in finance or something, instead of admitting that he made video games for a living. So obviously this was much, much worse. Like, if you go back into the 70s and 80s, it was like that's just totally for nerds, and you were like bullied for this stuff. Yeah, I think it was our generation that started to kind of normalize this as something most kids enjoyed or did or whatever. So I guess that was what was so surprising to me at this work event, was that a lot of these people were my age, and they still had these attitudes about it. And that made me really rethink, like, you think we've come a long way. The industry is enormous now. There's like so many people playing, but I think there's still a lot of maybe shame involved in it. People feeling like they're, the image of like, guys who live in their mom's basement and play video games all day, and they're lonely and they're losers and whatnot. Right. I think is a stereotype or a stigma people jump to right away. Right. Particularly with certain types of games. If you're playing MMOs, or if you're playing, big, massive online sort of games, shooters,
games that have
competitive
no end, basically.
Yeah.
That would be something that I don't know. Games that have no end, well, they don't appeal to me at all. Yeah. I get that they can be fun, but they tend to be more mindless than anything. Yeah. That could play more into it a little bit. I could see myself even being like, look, if you're gonna play a game, if you're gonna play games, kids, play games that like mean something. Yeah. Right. And there's plenty of them, I know. Yeah.
Well, this takes me back to, and you correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I'm misremembering what you said. But I thought I remembered a little while ago that you said you were doing something kind of similar with your kids. You're not letting them really play games.
Yeah, I don't let them play much. That has a lot more to do with screen time, just in general. And this is something that you'll find, especially a lot of executives in the tech space, people who make things like phones and social media, they limit their own children's screen time. Yeah. Screen time is one of the things that has been shown to be damaging over a certain amount of time, right? Yeah. And so limiting my child's screen time includes television, it includes movies, it includes video games, it includes any interaction with a screen, basically. Yeah. So I've got lots of like puzzles, blocks, things my kids can build with their hands. My kids are getting into music. They're starting to get into sports. And I like to do, we read a lot of books. My kids all read at an early age. and they all absolutely love books. My 2-year-old just sits down for hours all the time, just flipping through pages of books. Mm-hmm. And I read, like just the other day, in fact, we do this almost every night. I read to my kids an hour to 2 hours every single day.
Yeah.
And we read Grimm's fairy tales. Yep. We read like old stories. We read all kinds of things from all over. King Arthur fables and all of that stuff. Folk tales and mythologies. My kids love all the mythologies.
Right.
So we get into all that kind of stuff. Video games has a lot more to do with screen time. Though I will say that lately they've been playing more of that. They play the Lego games every now and then. So Lego Jurassic Park, they just finished.
Nice.
They freaking loved it. They thought it was great. And then they've played the Harry Potter games, although they usually play those with my wife. Sorry, Nancy Drew.
Oh.
Not Harry Potter. Lego Harry Potter.
Harry Potter.
But Nancy Drew. They played the Nancy Drew games with my wife. A couple of them. They think it's fun. It's suspenseful and intriguing. But I don't actually let them, certainly not unsupervised, but I don't really let them play video games. And I don't know when I'm going to like introduce that to them.
A little bit more.
Because obviously I'm going to.
Yeah.
I don't know when it's going to happen. And when it happens, I don't know what games. Like if I give them the freedom to pick out their own game, what are they going to pick?
Probably what
that
their
is something
peers
nervous
would
for me.
Playing, which I mean, at this point in time, kids are playing Minecraft, Fortnite, Roblox.
Now, Minecraft is such an interesting one. I
think there's a lot of creativity.
Oh yeah,
that can be
massive
for sure.
And
I think it's good
people
for kids.
build like machines and functioning like clocks and like things like with gears and computerized things within Minecraft. You can make so many things. There's a group of people who've made through Minecraft. They've made the world of Middle Earth like to scale, and like they've made Lothlorien and Gondor and like this massive world. Yeah. And it's the
Starship
coolest
Enterprise
thing.
Or whatever. Yeah,
so cool. Yeah. I would not be too upset about something like Minecraft, whereas something like Fortnite, I could see myself being like, look, we're go back and read some books, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to say really quickly, one thing I really love is that, because this is what my mother did. So while she was, I think, maybe had a misguided attitude about games and was maybe more strict than she needed to be about that and had the wrong ideas about what effect it may or may not have, she was very adamant about us reading.
Yeah.
We were reading all the time. She was reading to us. I think that is super important.
See, my biggest fear is not that my kids play video games all the time. My biggest fear is that my kids don't like to read.
Yes.
And I don't know, like, say fear. I'm using that word pretty loosely, but like, I really, if I am going to instill anything in my children, it's a love of stories and books.
Yeah.
Specifically, like fictional stories.
Yeah.
And I think I've done a pretty good job. I asked my daughter what her favorite book was the other day, and she said Grimm's Fairy Tales. And I was like, yes, that's right.
Yeah. Well, and this is sort of a tangent. I'm a video that's going to be coming out on Monday. I always say this and then the video doesn't come out. And that's because I double freaking like guess myself all the time. Like there's a lot of videos I've made in the past that were almost complete that I didn't release because of this. But this one is for sure coming out because it's Unicorn Overlord. So I've been playing the demo for that, right? And the game is coming out, I think, next week. At the end of the week. But anyway, it's really good. But there's been a lot of people, again, I don't know what the actual scale of this is. Probably very small. This is just very loud minority of people, but who are really upset about the localization of the game in comparison to the Japanese text and showing the differences and whatnot.
Of course, right.
And
that's always going to happen.
One thing, as far as their complaints go, I'm not here to like rail on these people or denounce them entirely, but I have found it funny that for the most part, when it comes to this topic of localization, I tend to kind of side with the localizers and with the changes they make and understanding them. Mm-hmm. Whereas a lot of people see this more as something like censorship. And sometimes that's true.
Oh, interesting argument.
Sometimes this is true.
Yeah.
There's a really great example from like Fire Emblem Fates, I think.
Oh, that's right. The assassins having the deep conversation.
Who have a really profound conversation about the fact that what they kill people for a living, right? And like what this does to them as people. It's this long back and forth that they turned into a joke in the English version.
Yeah, where it's like da 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 da.
Yeah,
da,
they
da,
just
da,
don't
da,
say
da, da.
anything to each other,
Yeah.
and then they just leave.
But what they're really saying is like, oh, what's it like to kill somebody, and oh, do you feel good about yourself after having done it? And but they just completely took it out.
Yes. So I'm not here to say like I'm on one side entirely. Obviously, there are great examples where that harms your perception of the characters. It changes them entirely and removes something that I think is really important to the story, to the game, or whatever. That obviously happens. And there may be a few instances where I agree in this long thread on Twitter where it's like, well, on that one, I think I can see where the guy's coming from. That changes a little bit how I perceive that character, whether I see her as being really afraid or I see her as being slightly bothered by this, but stoic.
Yeah, okay.
Right? Something like that.
Yeah.
So that happens, and I'm sure that there are examples in this game where that's happened. But there were a lot of complaints about the higher form of language that they're using, something that feels more medieval, something more Shakespearean, I guess.
Nothing wrong with that, man. I love that.
Right. And I mean, Yasumi Matsuno himself got involved in this thread, talking with people.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And talking about localization and listening to people's responses and talking about how he said something about the Hokuten Knights, how that was translated in English and it made no sense. And he was asked directly, do you like the War of the Lions English translation better than the original? He said, yes, absolutely. He was also known for telling the translators for Vagrant Story to make the language biblical in English, even though it's not in Japanese. And there's a couple of things. This is so off topic. Holy crap. I'm not sure why I got here necessarily, other than to say, I'm glad my mother raised me to read a lot.
Good.
And particularly to just have like a stronger grasp on the English language than maybe the average person does. And this was and her insistence on how much we read. We read a lot. We read every day. We read a lot every day.
Yeah.
We read together. We read on our own. Like we were assigned to read all the time. And so I sort of developed just like an understanding of the use of allegory, the use that like there's one guy who was really confused, like, what is true about like the rising sun? That makes no sense. And why is she being compared to a horse? And like all these things. And we were talking about conceits, right?
Vagrant Story.
In Vagrant Story. And that's how people talk to each other a lot.
You use metaphors and then you try to undercut the other person's metaphor with like in some way that they didn't think of.
Or using the metaphor in another example to sort of, flip the context and like kind of pitch it back and forth.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that.
You end up arguing about something that seems completely unrelated.
Yes.
But it's like, no, it's a meta.
Yes.
It's a meta discussion of the actual principle or the actual idea.
Right. So, seeing these people not understand those things, and the fact that this translation and this original text, maybe more closely like directly translated, are actually saying the same thing, and them not catching that because they don't understand they don't have and I don't mean to say this to be condescending. I just think that a lot of kids, even in our generation and now, are not growing up reading as much.
It's true.
And because of that, there's a lack of literacy that struck me as being like, that's not good. Yeah. Like, it's not good that people are not able to catch the differences in the language.
Like being subtle, like subtleties, right? Because that means that you just have to be more overt and explicit about everything. Yeah. You can't be as artistic. You can't be as creative. You can't be as allegorical or metaphorical with your speech. You've got, or more symbolic. You've got to always just, like you're talking to a computer. Like you have to say exactly what you mean every time. Even though allegory and metaphor is like such a good way of conveying ideas sometimes. But, if you just can't always do that, then you've lost a huge tool for communication.
Right. So... anyways, and then again, kind of last point, and then I'll probably talk more about this in the actual video that goes up, but The reason why you don't see that sort of elevated, more ancient form of speaking in Japanese is because people today in Japan basically don't understand that Japanese at all.
It's really hard when
they can't write in that style and have anyone even be able to read it.
It's true.
And this is partly why I'm so glad I was raised reading like that.
Like Shakespeare.
Because we didn't lose.
Yeah.
I didn't lose my tether back to that form of English, and I can actually read it and understand it.
Because it's cool.
Yes,
like, that form of English is the
It's
best
way
form
more
of
beautiful than what we
really
speak
is.
today.
Yeah.
Way more.
Way more.
They use way more words.
That's right.
Like the sort of like the average, what do you call it? Like
vocabulary.
Like the number of words in your vocabulary.
Yeah. For a person, not for the dictionary.
For the average person.
For the average person, yeah.
Today versus then is just like astronomically lower.
Yeah.
And I think that's, personally, I think that's a shame. You know, you're losing touch because language has so much connection with your culture and the culture you came from.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to maintain our ability to be able to read and connect with the culture of the people we came from before.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And that is unfortunate with Japan. I can't remember which episode. Maybe it was Final Fantasy X. But I brought up the fact that if a Japanese person goes and listens to kabuki theater, they need a Japanese translator. They're all wearing like headsets because the play is being performed in the original Japanese, but the Japanese people can't understand it, and so everybody wears this little headset that has the modern Japanese translation.
Right.
And we don't have to do that if we go to watch a play about Shakespeare or something, but we. Some people might actually.
Yeah, and nowadays. We probably would need that for Middle English or especially for
like
Old
Canterbury
English.
or something. But I don't need it anymore.
Yeah, you're learning Old English now. But I think that's
freaking
great.
Love it.
Anyways, way off the topic, but this all comes around to me saying I think it's a really good thing to make sure your children are well-rounded in their hobbies, in what they are engaging with, and not just getting locked into kind of one thing.
Right.
However,
and being social.
Yeah, so being I think that's something I missed growing up that has hurt me, and I think I've had to really overcome a lot of hurdles because of it.
Right.
Because I was homeschooled through basically all of elementary school.
Right.
I went back to school in junior high.
That's right. Yeah.
But it hurt me a lot. I really had a hard time sort of reading social cues and fitting in with kids my age. And I felt very isolated and lonely, and that just made me recoil even more than my natural personality would tend to push me to do. So anyway, so I love that. You know, they need to work on puzzles. They need to engage their minds. They need to go outside, all these things. So I just want to say that off the bat, as I understand that all of that is vitally important in raising children. That being said, my experiences playing games growing up are some of the most formative and lasting, impactful experiences of my life. And I can't imagine how I would be different today had I not played those games. I mean that in like all seriousness.
Yeah.
And so why would I rob my children of the opportunity to have things like that, especially for something I don't understand now? I understand games, but what's the thing that's going to come up that I don't understand and be like, oh, this is studies are saying, or this will make you this way. Like, obviously, it's not going to be gaming that I'm going to be concerned about with my kids. It's going to be something else.
It'll be the AR metaverse with virtual reality goggles all the time.
Yeah, something different, something that makes me go like, wait a minute, I'm not sure this is good for you or whatever.
Yes.
But how can I look back to the way I was stigmatized and not sort of repeat that and rob them of experiences that could really be positive forces in their life?
You know, one of the funnest experiences when I was a kid is the few times, and I mean few, that my dad would play games with us.
Yeah, totally.
I feel like I remember each time that happened.
Yeah.
Us as kids, we would jump up and down and we'd teach our dad how to do something, which is always fun for a kid to teach the dad how to do stuff. And my dad was horrible at every game that he played, but it was so fun that he was with us. He was doing it with us, and we got to show him this thing that like means so much to us. And it's so funny that I remember those so well, and that I wouldn't want to be aloof, even if it's something that I don't get.
Yeah.
I would want to do it with my kids, just remembering that it was so fun when my dad would sometimes play games with us.
This is an excellent point. And it's something that I've tried to talk about with my parents a couple times. Every family has some rifts or problems, or there's some tension or things they're going through. And you're trying to talk about how can we help repair this, or how can we have a tighter bond as a family.
Yeah.
And one of my suggestions, this was probably 5 years ago, was why don't we have a night where, we choose someone in the family and we all go learn about something
whatever
they love that we're not like,
a great idea.
We don't really know about, and for me, that would have been something like Xenogears.
Oh yeah.
Right. Like I would have taught them about why this game is important to me.
Right.
And it would have just, I'm sure, baffled my father. Right. Like my dad is not a fan of like fantasy fiction at all.
It's true.
And it is a huge thing for me. It's one of the things I love the most in life.
Yeah.
And the things we bonded over, my dad and I, as when I was a kid, were sports and things like that. And I still remember how he didn't express it, or at least didn't try to, but I could feel it. His disappointment when I quit the basketball team in high school.
Yeah. You were good, by the way. You were quite good.
He was so disappointed, and there was a split. Like I can feel it to this day, where he doesn't really know how to talk and relate to me anymore.
Right.
We can still talk about those things. I still have an interest in sports and following sports and talking about it, and so we can still do that.
Yeah.
But well, I would say that the two things is like his thing is he's very religious. Right. He writes religious books.
Yeah.
And I'm no longer religious, so that's a rift I think he feels between us.
Yes.
And then all this stuff that I talk about, he's not interested in.
Right.
And so it has created this divide where I feel like if we could just and man, I have so many thoughts coming right now, like things I want to say about this. But like what you're saying, it's when you try, you make an effort,
even just a small effort,
to understand what it is about this thing you don't get that they love as much as they do.
They will happily explain it to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you will learn stuff that you didn't know, and you won't have to fear this thing you don't understand anymore being this horrible thing that you got to keep from them.
I've often thought this, that every now and then, and this happens a lot in politics, but elsewhere, this just happens everywhere, where people will use, I just don't understand, or they will say, I don't understand, as like, that's their argument.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't understand how you can think this or do this or whatever. I just don't. But what it really is you're just criticizing yourself. You're just saying that you don't understand something. And you're publicly telling everyone, I don't understand something. And you're using it as though you just won an argument or scored some points. When in reality, you're just proclaiming your own ignorance to the world and acting as though you did some morally beneficial thing.
Yes.
And the fact is, if you don't understand something, and someone you love cares about that thing, try to understand it. I have completely, maybe not completely, but I've tried to completely eliminate that hermeneutic of argumentation from my methods, from my whole system. Like I do not ever want to use I don't understand as one of my arguments against anything. Yeah. Like I'm going to go understand it then. Like if that's the problem, that's my problem, right? It's not your problem.
Yes, exactly.
That's my problem. So I'm going to go understand it. And then I may still have some criticisms, but one of them won't be my profound ignorance.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. And this is kind of getting to the heart of what I was wanting to discuss today, not only because I longed for my father to do that with my stuff, after I stopped being a basketball player, but because I feel I am just as guilty of sort of talking about things I don't understand in a way that stigmatizes other people.
Sure.
And that I also need to make an effort to do this. Like, definitely, for sure. I think everybody, I think it's natural when you don't understand something to fear it or be wary of it or just like not sure about it. And the more you understand it, the less scary it becomes. Okay. And the more you feel like, well, I know how to handle this. I know what to do.
Right.
So I don't need to completely restrict video games from my child. I just need to make sure that it's part of a balanced life.
That's the whole thing. What is it? Moderation in all things, right?
Right. So Hegel, the German philosopher, there's two things that he sort of described that really resonate with me, that I really feel are important.
Yeah.
One, and they're kind of linked, but the idea is to find the kernels of truth that you don't currently have in ideologies or in history and in cultures that you might think badly about or that you might consider enemies to you.
That's very good.
Right? So, for instance, say the medieval times where they had horrific sort of like they treated women and children just like terribly during this time, as far as rights, as far as forced labor, horrific views on many things. But you could go there and find like a real sense of honor.
I was actually just about to use medieval as an example of the exact opposite of what you just said.
Well, that'll be interesting.
I was like, medieval Christianity actually did a really good job of incorporating like pagan stuff. And there was actually a letter written by one of the great popes they call him the last great pope, but I can't remember what his name was. But it was like in the 6th century or something. And he wrote a letter to some priests in England because the English were saying, hey, we converted a bunch of people to Christianity, but they've got their pagan temples here still. What do you want us to do about them? Should we smash them and destroy them? And he said, no, preserve them, but put the altar of Christ in the center of them now, but keep the pagan stuff. Yeah. Keep the stories. Christians wrote down all the pagan stories, and keep all the cool stuff. That's a great example. Just point it towards Christ now.
Because this is a lot with the Catholic Church.
Yeah, this is what.
Right? Yeah, so that's a great example.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church did a lot of horrific things. I mean, just multitudes of horrific things. But like you can find that
stuff like that,
and you can realize it's not all entirely evil. And I can take that principle, which may be lost in my life or in my time, and say, or let's say the ancient Greeks, who certainly had many problems with their culture and whatnot, that we would look back on and be like and condemn. But their sense of community is something that I think a lot of people today might think we've lost with social media and cell phones and people not even talking to each other and just like. But they
not to mention just the great ideas that civilization was able to foster.
Sure, and maybe one that's a little bit more controversial today, colonialism. So like that sort of time period of Britain and all these European countries going out and just like taking land and colonizing all these places and the slave trade and like all this stuff that happened. Go into those, despite the fact that you probably rightfully have many concerns about the moral compasses of the people and cultures of that time, and try to find the thing there that you don't have. This was kind of Hegel's idea.
Yeah,
you do it with history. Nice. And you do it with other groups, whether it be political, whether it be religious, whether it be whatever, that you find you are opposed to, and try to locate within that. There's something that I feel like I could actually use and incorporate.
And that way, this opposing ideology becomes something that you can actually benefit from, as opposed to just constantly fight against.
Yes.
It's like, well, and if you were able to extract from that ideology something beneficial and incorporate it into your group, the whatever group you belong to, then you kind of are able to effectively terminate the opposing ideology.
Yes.
Because it's like, no, we do all the good things that you do. You're basically left. The only differentiators now are you're left with bad things.
Yes.
But in order to do that, you have to be open to adopting some of their things in the first place.
Yes.
And a lot of people are not willing to do that.
Yes.
Because it's their thing. And no, I'm not you, I'm me.
And also, a lot of times you don't spend much time trying to understand groups that you feel are evil or morally bankrupt or silly, or even if it's not something as heavy as that, even just something that like video games.
Right. Yeah.
If you understand it better, you'll fear it less.
Right.
You'll see the parts of that you can find common ground with people with. Even if it's not very much, you can find it.
Yeah. Well, there has, because we're all human.
Yes.
So there has to be some.
Yes.
Like there will be. If you look, you will find something because that person did, and that unless your opinion is that person is completely different from you.
Yes.
The similarities that you have to each other will align in whatever this media is as well.
I believe firmly. Maybe I'm totally, I don't know, like too optimistic or just totally misguided. But I truly believe that we are much more similar than we are different. And that this is for men and women. This is for religious groups. There's way more about us that when you go and actually try to understand an opposing culture that is similar than different. There, and again, I've talked about this a little bit, like in previous episodes and stuff, but my opportunities to travel for work have really opened my eyes to that in a big way. About a lot of things that I grew up taking for granted or thinking this is how the world is and just being totally wrong about it. Because that was taught to me from some lens of maybe nationalistic lens, you could say, that that had not tried to really understand other cultures.
Real nationalism has never been tried. Just kidding.
Anyway, okay, so I kind of wanted to use that as like a foundation for the conversation, right? I think it's really important to try to understand things you don't instead of fear them and avoid them or ban them from your life or whatever, because you'll find things in there, even if you don't agree with the majority of it, even if you find it repulsive, there's going to be something there that is probably important for you to know that can at least give you a better idea of how you should navigate which parts of this do I really not want in my life, and how much should I really fear this and whatnot. You'll be way more informed, if nothing else, and that'll give you a way better place to actually make good decisions about how you should treat this and whatnot.
If you allow, let's say if you think it's an abhorrent ideology, if you allow it to keep the goodness that whatever it is that it has that is meaningful that people can see, then it will continue to leverage that to its own benefit and will continue to grow or whatever it is. If it's something that's bad but it's got some good in it, they'll just point to the some good and be like, hey guys, look, we're the only ones that are going to protect this thing. Right. Those guys hate us. That means they hate this good thing. Right. And so then you can use that to recruit and all that kind of stuff.
Firepower.
Whereas if somebody's able to extract that from them and then find that minimal common ground, it actually would make what would truly still be seen as an abhorrent structure crumble. Right. Because it no longer has the sole claim to that.
Right. That's a great point.
So what you're saying, Mike, what you're telling me is that you have created your own waifu list.
Well, I probably should try.
every what is it? You got to try everything once.
Exactly. The thing is like, I think, and I would not be alone in this, I think majority of people who are, let's say, very, very, very into anime and that sort of thing, probably have felt in their life isolated, kind of lonely.
There's a great movie about this.
But see, even me saying that might be stigmatizing it.
Right, and
already.
they're like, dude, I feel fine. What are you talking about?
Right, exactly, right? Because
you have this image that they are lonely, because that's the stereotype.
That's what the stereotype is, right? So I said that on purpose to catch
very
myself on purpose to show you that I'm thinking about this.
Very nice.
But because we've had similar comments where people come into our comment section and like, who are these, I guess in their opinion, good-looking, like Chad like guys talking about Xenogears. This is like throwing my world like out of whack. I don't believe, I never thought that guys like this would talk about this.
How dare they denigrate us Chads? We are we are a noble race.
So,
just kidding.
You know, again, the stereotype of people who play JRPGs and get really nerdy about it.
It's like,
is
dude, look,
a certain image.
Yeah, all of our friends played these
we
games.
Don't, I guess, in the eyes of these people, fit.
Right.
But to me, it's like, that's crazy. Almost everybody I know in real life is similar to us. So there's you know, there's probably something similar with
the social sorting thing.
The social sorting that I'm doing with waifu culture and otaku culture and just like in like really, 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 I don't want to use the word obsessive in a bad way, but more like in a passionate maybe is better.
Gotcha.
Passionate about this particular media form, anime, right? That I've dabbled in and that I like, but that I find a lot of it I don't understand. I don't get it. I don't get why people like this. It is in as far as the things I value in storytelling, it's betraying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, and I'm just like, I'm done. I check out, right? However, maybe the challenge, and this, I'm glad that you caught on to it, maybe should be give an attempt to like a good faith, like true attempt,
right?
To try to like understand it, make your waifu list, like try to engage in this, have fun with it, and see if there's something there that you can now understand better and not stigmatize people the way that you have in the past.
Right.
And so maybe we can actually for real do this and like
oh, this is gonna be great.
And you know, maybe engage our chat here a little bit.
Gosh, I don't know if I play enough games to make it 10. Can we do like 5?
Let's do 5.
Let's do 5.
Because we've already been talking for a while.
10 might be too much for me.
And I don't know. Like, okay, maybe we can expand it beyond just PS1. Because the reason I picked
that is the most common,
is because that's probably we'll know more in that than we would know like of like common like maybe like more modern or what's hip to watch in anime and video games now.
Yeah.
Like I'm not playing, I forget what the game is called, like Honkai Star Rail or freaking what's that other one? Genshin Impact.
Oh, yes.
I don't play that stuff, so there's nobody I know who I could pick for my list.
But
I could probably pick.
Didn't we play one of those at E3 though? I can't remember.
Oh,
maybe it wasn't Impact. What was that big?
There was. I know what you. It's Harvest Stella or something like that. No, not that.
No, Fate Stay. Fate Stay.
Yes,
that was it. Fate Stay.
That's the one.
Night or something like that.
Yeah. So anyway, maybe we can go to what we actually know, which is like what gen is that? The generation of N64 and PS1, and sort of like, you know, because we were younger then too, and like I said in last week's episode, I kind of did this already with Tifa and Aerith and Final Fantasy VII. I renamed them to girls that I knew at school.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to pick them because it's too easy. Like it'd be way too easy to just pick like Final Fantasy characters because we talk about that all the time. We know that. Yeah. So maybe not, if possible, Final Fantasy characters.
Oh, geez, that eliminates.
What are your like top 5 waifus?
Well, I gotta say Ellie, because I've seen her at her best and I've seen her at her worst.
Yeah.
And I've seen her, you know, she gives birth to that kid, and she never missed a day of feeding the chickens. Nope. Not one day. Karen would screw up all the time would miss things and would, sorry, I was drinking. Yeah. But Ellie, every day, man. If you want some consistency,
Ellie is top shelf.
She's basically
material.
#1.
she probably is for me too.
She's too good.
And what you brought up about seeing her at her best and worst, you know, the grandmother's death and like being there for all of that. There was like a real, I feel like, tie that I had to that character.
Yeah.
Much stronger than any other character in the game.
Yeah, I think so.
Like I'm gonna try to think of all the other characters and like the hard stuff they go through.
Cliff, there was something. Oh, I think was it a horse that died or something like that? For
Yes,
Anne? I can't remember.
That's right.
And then Potpourri, gosh, she was just into flowers. So I don't know.
The librarian girl.
I can't remember.
That I never
oh,
talked
that
to.
girl. Okay, so there's like 5 then. I forgot about her. I never really got to know her very well.
Exactly.
But she's the shy one. You know, they had someone for everybody, I guess.
Yeah, right. Let's see. They got to get creative here. I mean, I didn't play Tomb Raider, so like I.
Yeah, but well, this is actually a general question. Do you want a waifu who is like traveling the world, going to dangerous situations all the time?
Kind of.
Okay.
I like that sense of adventure personally.
That's cool. You want children?
That's part of why like I bonded with Caroline, for instance. Like, I was really reclusive for a lot of years. I just kind of lived in a freaking dark cave and never left. And she got me out doing a lot of adventurous stuff, and I realized that's a part of my life that was lacking that I actually really enjoy.
Right.
Like it's been really great. So I actually kind of like that aspect. So, but I don't know the game well enough to like know Lara Croft's personality or anything.
Yeah.
But I mean,
other than to say she's hardcore. And she has a dangerous job. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
Let's just say if you want kids, maybe that'll be rough with someone like her.
The thing that's hard is that there were so many games that it's kind of hard to even like remember all the games I played. Like even when I did my N64 video a couple weeks ago, I was like pulling stuff out. I'm like, oh yeah, like I have a this and this I could say about that, and they're like, oh, I forgot we had this, and like so I'm just trying to even remember. Maybe shipping would be better. Then we don't put ourselves into the equation.
Yeah, we just pair out who we think
would work best together. That's way safer.
That sounds much better.
That's way safer. To me, in Final Fantasy VII, it's clear that Tifa and Cloud are kind of like the right fit.
Yeah.
If only because, like, of what Tifa actually does. Like how far she goes to sort of rescue him in his like unconscious mind and all that when they're in the live stream together.
That's true.
I'm not sure how you argue otherwise after that scene at all.
The way that I understand it is that Tifa had known Cloud her whole life. Well, much of her life. Yeah. And that they had known each other and talked for a long time, and that Eris kind of comes along as something of a, I don't know what you'd call it. She's a little more flighty. She's trying to have fun. She's maybe a little bit younger. She shows up, but she also kind of goes away very quickly and registers as an important like blip in the life of Cloud and what's happening with him.
Right.
Whereas maybe we don't see it as much. But Tifa, he knew Tifa for like 10 years before he ever met Eris, and then only knew Eris for a little bit. And then Tifa and Cloud continue to know each other long after that. Well, depends on. Okay. After that. Sometime after that. And so Eris would count as maybe more of like a short-term fling type thing and less of like a long-term waifu. If you're talking waifu, first off, rule number 1, your wife needs to still be alive. Rule number 2, then maybe somebody you've known for a while and not just somebody who shows up flippant, really fun and flighty.
Yeah.
But
it seems to me that
stuff.
Eris or Aerith as a character in the story is essentially there to reveal like the obvious problem internally with Cloud.
Yeah.
But Tifa is there to help heal that.
Right.
And so it just seems natural to me that that's where you would incline to go. But what
do most people think of in terms of Cloud, Eris, and Tifa?
I don't know.
Okay. I wonder if it's 50-50 or if it's mostly Tifa, and then there's the
well, yeah,
the Eris heads.
Well, and then they got the Crisis Core with the Zack Eris thing, so I don't know how you switch
I'll tell you what.
up.
I think I know what's happening. You're right, Crisis Core, if you're going to bring that into it. But I really think what people are saying when they're talking about this stuff is just which girl's cuter. And
which girl do I like better?
Yeah, which girl do I like? Yeah.
And why?
In which case, it is a different conversation. It's less about the story and less about who is still alive at the end of it or not.
Sure.
And more about just like, were you to meet these two girls, like which one would you fall in love with?
I think you found it. I think you found the kernel I was looking for, right? Maybe the approach to how this is talked about or discussed it was off-putting to me in a way that made me think this is like parasocial relationship kind of stuff. These people aren't real. What are you doing? Right. But really, it's more just about trying to understand yourself a little better by understanding what aspects of a character speak to you more. Sure, and we do the same thing in our analysis of stuff.
Oh, right, totally.
We're just talking about it in a very different way.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
unless it's really Freudian, then we still talk about it in the same way. But it's a different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, I think that was productive, at least at the very end.
That was wonderful.
But there is one more thing I wanted to mention before we kind of wrap this one up. And that is based on the culture I was raised in and, I don't know, just the way I was shaped to think about sexuality in general. I think that, and in the past this would, for one, be something that made me uncomfortable about a lot of anime and sort of the expressions of sexuality that you see in a lot of that. And especially from the sort of perspective of young teen characters who are, let's just say, lacking maturity in this area. And so I think that there have been comments we've made about things in the past, whether it be Final Fantasy 15 with Cindy and whatnot, that shared, or even like Nier Automata. That might have been the latest one.
I mean, that was obviously intentional.
Yeah.
For the reason that we made the comment.
Right.
It was like, it's not like...
it's not wrong.
He did it on purpose. He did it to... he did it on purpose. That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
There's a great video that I want to point people to that we should definitely link in a pinned comment or description. The channel is called, I think it's Live, L-I-V, Live Average Gamer. Okay. It might be live. I'm not sure how it's supposed to be pronounced.
Or leave.
Yeah, whatever. Sexual objectification in games, or the video title, something like this. No. And it challenged a little bit of some of my I'll just call it what it is, puritanical upbringing in terms of my views about sexualization of characters in media and the effect that they may or may not have. Very similar to the discussion or debate about violence in games, right?
Sure, yes.
Like, I think I grew up defending violence in video games. It was so freaking backwards.
Did I? I don't know if I
violence is obviously way worse than sexualization, right? But somehow my brain goes to defend that as being, no, this doesn't affect or turn kids violent. But there's a part of me, while maybe not even really understanding consciously I was doing this, that was sort of looking at sexualizing female characters in games as being a negative thing. And I'm not necessarily, I haven't swung like all the way over here. So for those of you who definitely feel like there's sexism, misogyny, I'm with you on a lot of things. Right. And I took that position to at least a certain extent in the Nier Automata series.
Yeah, more or less. I know you're saying it's puritanical, but it's also a feminist argument.
Sure.
That the objectification of women.
Yeah.
I want to say it's not just like the hyper-conservative.
Sure. I only say that because, well, my religious upbringing
that was your
is
case.
One in which there was sort of a puritanically inspired sort of like way of talking about sex that I think is actually now, I really disagree with it. I think it's actually damaging in a lot of ways culturally. It actually has created a bigger problem. I think that this video, and maybe you can watch it later and get your thoughts on it, sort of like gave me some different perspective on it. But one really big point he makes in there is that there have been meta-analysis and studies done on this and show that the evidence is extremely weak that there's a correlation between engaging with this stuff in this sort of, fantasy, and having that correlate in any way to your behavior in real life. And that this is, sort of like the opposite of maybe some of the feminist, or the results show an opposite effect of what maybe some of the feminist arguments have been. Again, that is not, I am not saying, by saying that, by reporting the fact to you that the analysis came to this conclusion, that is in no way me saying that, like, we should, we can just throw out all of these concerns that maybe people in the feminist movement or people who associate themselves more closely with that point of view just throw out their concerns entirely. But it does bring up the fact that two things can be true. That's really the point I wanted to get at, as far as my conclusions or where I'm kind of sitting in this right now, is that I think I was stigmatizing, definitely, from like the point of view I was coming from, in how I talked about, why do you got to always do this? We have another bath scene in this freaking anime game where, oh no, I slipped and fell through the door and I saw the girls in the bath. These things that I feel like I was stigmatizing big time. Right. And I would roll my eyes at it and kind of be like all aggrieved about it. Like, why do you have to put this in there? You're ruining it.
What they've just done is they've made it so that you can never watch that with your spouse now.
You
have to watch it alone.
But again, is that stigma that makes you feel uncomfortable to watch it around family, or is that also a problem? Right? It's not just the fact that maybe we should be more careful about the way we represent. Well, we should be better at how we represent women and giving them agency in the story, not making them into purely rewards and objectifying them in this way. We should think about how we represent women and maybe try to do a better job, right? That can be true, and it can also be true that stigmatizing this is not a good thing either, and that maybe there is some healthy, there probably is a healthy way to express sexuality in a fantasy that the puritanical view I grew up with stifled, and that's actually harmful too, is kind of where my mind is on this right now. And I feel like I have done a lot of that in videos that we've made, in not podcasts, but in podcasts, when it comes to Nier. Because I think when we did the first Nier, and I don't remember if we agreed on this. I think we did. I
think we did, yeah.
Where we weren't, like all
we've
stuck
not
up about Kaine.
We're not on one side of the issue. It all depends on how it's done. And Yoko Taro was very clear about his intentions with making Nier Automata the way that he made it.
Yeah.
I don't think we had to read into or judge anything. He was very clear about it.
Sure.
And so we were able to critique that and be like, well, okay, since you're so clear about why you did this, maybe that's not the best reason to have a character look like this. Whereas for Kaine, it was a totally different thing. In fact, it was the art, what would you call it? The art, what is it? The art designer, whatever the word is, the art department kind of showed him the design that he didn't even ask for. And then he said, wow, this is shocking. What do you think? Why are you doing it this way? And they explained it to him, and he agreed, and he said, all right, this is the design. This is what Kaine's going to look like. And she had a really interesting story for it, and there was all these reasons, and there was this whole... It was not anything to be upset about. She was like a real character.
Yeah.
And in Nier Automata, he was like... he just really... He asked for everyone to send him all the porn that they could make of his characters, and he purposefully would show camera angles that were very gratuitous, and he's just like, hey, guys, hey, I did this for you.
And my point is, there was a time in which I would have looked at that and, like, with side eye or maybe been, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, just dismissive of it or treated it like it's beneath, like, the art that is in
I would still think that. Yeah, I would still think that.
And I guess that's why I want to share this video. I want, and it can. And what I'm trying to say is two things can still be true.
Yes.
Like that's where I'm at. But this particular video, which I think is really, really, really well done, really well argued, and uses a lot of really good data to make the points. It's very, very well made. Really made me question some of that stigmatizing that I did and think about, maybe what Yoko Taro, his reasons for wanting to include it as open and sort of like obvious as this is not something pertaining to elevating the story. This is simply because
this is pure gratuitous.
Yes. That
fan service or whatever
might not necessarily be as bad as a lot of people think it is. There may be a healthy expression of sexuality in that people either coming from my camp growing up or coming from the feminist camp, you could find a kernel in, is what I'm trying to say.
Gotcha.
Where this part of it, I may disagree with all of this and see this as harmful or bad, or like harming young women and their perception of themselves and all these things that you could argue that I think are probably good points.
Right.
Yet, I think there's probably something in there that you might be able to pull out and go, I don't need to stigmatize the people who like this as much as I do, or even at all, because their reason for doing it is not what I think it is. Right. I think it's for the misogyny, and I think it's for objectification and all this stuff. Right. There actually might be more to it than that, is all I'm trying to say.
And if you're talking about the people specifically, I would totally agree with you there. My analysis of the art, independent of what Joe Schro likes about the game, is less relevant, I guess. Whereas if you're just gonna like make fun of the people, which we sometimes have, probably using that exact argument of I don't understand, and then that's not maybe the best argument.
Right.
I do have a thought real quick though. I know we're probably about done, and this could maybe be completely cut.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's a bit of a double standard, or there's like you've brought up the meta-analyses several times. I personally am not a fan of meta-analyses in general because they couple studies that had different parameters and they just kind of throw them all in so they can have a larger sample size.
Yes.
And then they kind of assign things in a way that weren't initially meant to, and then they draw conclusions from that. The reason I don't love them in general is because it's not a real study. It's a meta-analysis of a bunch of studies, and often these meta-analyses get overturned and are wrong and turned out to be different, or they excluded their rules of exclusion and inclusion of certain studies skewed the results, right? But one of the things I want to even bring up, and the reason I even bring that up at all, is because we mentioned violence in video games and then sexuality in video games, and then talking about whether it's bad or not as to whether or not it encourages negative expression of these things. But I feel like there's a little bit of something that we should bring up, at least in our messaging, which is that games really do have a profound effect upon you.
Oh, 100%.
A huge, profound effect upon you about how you live your life. They change your perceptions. They change how you act. They change all sorts of things about you. But then I'll just you bring up the meta-analyses that say, no, the violence doesn't affect you. No, the sex stuff doesn't affect anybody. It doesn't. There's no real world consequences. And I feel like there's a bit of a paradox there.
Clarify, it's not saying necessarily that. There's no effect as much as it's saying, well, I'll read it, but I'll let you keep
Go ahead, because that's all I'm saying. It's just there's kind of a paradox here, which is the games don't affect you at all, stop worrying, and then the games can change your entire life. Right?
Yes, that's a very good point. I'm glad you brought it up, because I do believe that. And I do believe the media in general can have profound negative effects. Propaganda works for a reason.
Totally, yeah.
So we're not making that argument.
Yeah.
As much as we're saying that for the majority of people who engage in a fantasy, they can still leave that and understand that was a fantasy. It's not.
Fair enough.
They're not.
True.
For the most part, people are not confusing
their
actions in a video game with something that is permissible to do in real life. I would say the vast majority of people are able to separate those two things and be like, I can go around shooting up an entire city in Grand Theft Auto and I'm never going to even consider doing such a thing in real life.
It's wild that that's even a sentence that can be said, but I think it's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's I think really what it's getting at is that people are able to separate fantasy from reality for the most part.
That relates more to like what Jacques Lacan's theory of movies and media experience in general, which is that it puts you into like a dreamlike state where you don't even really feel that it's you. Like you almost, you identify as the character as though you are the character, but it's almost in this dreamlike way that actually doesn't have as much relation to your actual being, your actual life in the real, and is more just a projection of the mind, similar to a dream that can easily kind of be put into like a different category.
Yeah. Let me just quickly read the abstract here from this analysis. Whether video games with sexualized content do or do not relate to mental health and body image problems in players and or sexualization and hostility toward women is an issue of broad public interest. However, evidence from empirical studies has generally been mixed. To examine this issue, we explored the degree to which sexualization in games was related to both well-being, body dissatisfaction, and sexism misogyny among players in two separate meta-analyses.
Okay. Those are hard things to define in terms of, those are value judgments, basically, in terms of like whether good or bad,
that's
or
why
harmful or not.
This is such a, I think, heatedly
because this
debated
extends
topic.
to like Barbie and other things.
For sure. For sure.
Huh.
Results revealed that sexualization in games was neither related to well-being or body dissatisfaction, nor sexism, misogyny. And they have a bunch of stuff there, references to the study. Better designed studies and those that showed less evidence for researcher expectancy effects for sexism, misogyny outcomes tended to find less evidence for effects. As appears commonly in other realms of media effects, the evidence is weak that sexualized games influence player attitudes and behavior. So essentially what they're saying is...
It's hard to have an objective study, is what I heard from all of
Well,
that.
yeah, you have to... I think what the central part of the takeaway from that last part of that is when you examine the... trying to think of a better word other than agenda.
Oh, geez.
When you examine the agenda of the people funding the study, and
that's always a big thing too.
You have to try to, you have to be more skeptical of studies that clearly are being funded. Like, for instance, if there's a study on the health effects of like bacon and eggs that is funded by like beef packing industry or whatever, you have to be more skeptical of that because the entire reason,
or just don't even value it at all. Like, don't even read that study.
Exactly. I think that's what it's trying to say. When you take out the studies that seem to clearly have been conducted with that purpose, you're going to find way less effect.
I wouldn't say when you do it, it's when they did it.
Yeah.
Because they would have, I may have included certain things that they didn't. And anyways, I'm not a fan of meta-analyses.
You are you're totally valid in your skepticism of meta-analyses.
Yes, you're not belittling my kind. You're not, what's the word? What were we doing? Stigmatizing. You're not stigmatizing the skeptical community.
Yes, because we need that.
Right.
You've got to be skeptical. You can't rest your laurels on certain, rest on your laurels with certain assumptions. Right. And when you find people that are good at that are sort of like, oh, I just assumed this is correct or whatever.
Right.
You know, you need
which we all do.
Yeah.
All the time.
So anyway, point being, I think this video is interesting. It has made me rethink some stuff. And again, I don't agree with like everything the dude says, but that's not the point. That's not the point.
I think
the point is the Hegel point that I made an hour ago.
Is there anything that you can agree with? And
is there anything you can find from the person on this side of this debate that you can go, well, that's a point I didn't consider.
Yeah.
And maybe I have been faulty in my thinking on this in this respect.
Sure.
And because of that, I can actually reflect and go, well, maybe I have lived my life with a lot of repressed sexuality, and how has that actually had an effect on me as a person and maybe some of my dysfunction or whatever, right? Or what makes me uncomfortable? Should that be making me uncomfortable? Or is my being uncomfortable with that causing me to now do harm in whatever degree?
Oh, so it could be
by
the opposite.
stigmatizing someone else for this, that is causing them harm and shame and all these things and making them feel in a way that could do, like real damage to them. And that might come from just a flippant comment I make about a character's design while we're streaming Final Fantasy 15, and some guy could be watching and feel a sense of shame that I never intended to.
But okay, now let's talk about
them,
briefly how do we feel responsible for something like that, though? Because we analyze these games, we have our thoughts and opinions, and on every single thing has a counter to it. And these podcasts would be very long indeed were we to every critique, every time we talk about anything, every time we express, our personal opinions or values on something else, to always tamper it down or water it down with some, not all, like every time,
right.
That is cumbersome. And I get that it's maybe necessary in certain regards. But I don't think you should, nor would I think you would even want to be like that for everything, I guess.
Well, yeah, to be like that, like
that would
perpetually would be like you'd go insane.
Yeah.
You'd land in this space where you're just like constantly caught between
and
these perspectives.
And you can never act.
You can never sort of form your own worldview on things.
Right.
And
because there's a hole in it, so I can't have my worldview anymore because there's a hole in it.
Yeah.
But it's like, no, there's a hole in everything, and you've got to do something.
The whole point is there are holes in your perspectives and in your worldviews. And when you're at least conscious of this and you're not like doubling, tripling, quadrupling down all the time on being right about everything, and you're
I feel like we're pretty good at that.
yeah, and you're actually making an attempt to understand your opposition, like really understand it, that's when you're going to find the kernels that fill the holes.
Very good.
In your perspectives. You're not going to come all the way around on it. You're not going to agree in full. There's still going to be parts of that you think are harmful or damaging or bad or evil maybe even. But you're at least going to become yourself a much more well-rounded person, a much more educated person, an informed person, and a much more compassionate person who understands people better and is able to relate with them better and communicate better.
Oh,
and
that's a good one,
that should be the goal of all of this, not to put yourself into a never-ending limbo of not being able to decide
to have an
what you
opinion
think.
on anything. somebody might be upset.
Yeah. So anyway, this is some of my thoughts, or our thoughts on this particular topic. We'll see what happens next week. Maybe next week we'll have an actual real waifu list and we have some time to think about it.
Jeez.
We have some actual time to think about it and not make the mistake of slipping into my 8-year-old brain.
Oh, man. Sometimes it's crazy to think of how old we actually are.
It's insane. I literally can't believe it sometimes.
Are you kidding me?
It doesn't freaking make any sense.
Man.
Like, for instance, well, I think we've talked about this before, and this is going way too long. I probably shouldn't do it, but like when I think about the period of time of my childhood, it seems like this, it feels, I guess, like this, an equal amount of time to my adulthood. Yeah. And it's not even close. My adulthood is almost twice as long.
Yeah.
As far as like actual time goes.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like it. And part of that is because what we talked about in the past, you form way more memories during your formative years. So I remember a lot of things, or a lot more things, I guess, from a certain time period. And so it seems longer. And there's just a lot of stuff my brain is going, nah, it's not worth remembering, and just like tossing away. And so like time seems all compressed and fast. And but it's a wild thing to actually experience for the first time in the, I would say, the last 2 or 3 years or whatever. Because, I don't know.
There's less moments. If you measure time in minutes, then, it's, a year is a year. But if you measure time in moments, there are certain years that are longer than others.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. See you next week.